What's up, boys and girls? This is Spit Logic, and today we're going to have a video about the SP-404 Mark II and your export options on that device. We've essentially broken this down into 3 different segments. Number 1, we're going to talk about kind of your options for creating an entire song. Then we're going to go into the different bounce options, the online option in real time versus an offline bouncing option. And then we're going to talk about the SP-404 Mark II app on your personal computer and how you utilize that and interact with it with your SP-404 Mark II. After you've already created your patterns and you want to play them in a particular sequence, you want to play them, in a particular way. One thing that you can do if you want to record it in real time is have each of the pads kind of segmented, layered, and laid out directly into the sequence where you want them to go, so that as you press one button and you want to go to the next pattern, it's very simple. While you have the one pattern going, once you press that other pattern, you see this is lit up because the pattern is currently playing. I will push the next pattern right here and you see it blinking. This is just indicating to you that that is the next pattern that is going to play after this pattern is done. So you'll see as we come to the 8th bar, and now it goes straight to the next one. Once it goes to the next one, that is your time to push that next pattern that you want to go to, and then that pattern will switch over to the next one once you're complete and once you're done. This is one way that you can go about just ensuring that you have that song created. You can just tie those chains and just make it easier for you to just put them in sequence by which pattern you want to go first, second, or third. And you have a really good option here to simply just copy the same patterns that you want to do over and over again. So one thing that I have noticed about the SP-404 Mark II, and we'll get into it as we go into this next pattern right here. The pattern that you're currently in is the pattern that will copy. So if you hit that copy button and you see it light up, it will already select that first pattern for you because it's the one that's currently playing. If I hit the next place that I want it to go and I hit that copy, it's going to copy the entire pattern, and we'll go right back and we'll go straight back into the drum, the same one that we just had right here. When you copy one particular pattern and you want to duplicate it, but you don't want all of the elements or all of the pads or all of the sounds to go in, what you do, you hit the copy button and it's going to ask you for a pattern. You push which pattern you want to copy, and then the blinking places where it's blinking, you're going to put it into one of those empty spaces where you want the pattern to go. So I hit that, and you're not complete yet. You see right here, right under here, it says remain, samples to copy. If I hit that remain button, I go back into, I'm out of the pattern mode and I'm actually in the sample mode. I'm in where the individual samples and individual pads are. And I can select only the samples that I want to copy from one pad to the other. So if I just want to copy those, I'll hit the copy button again. And I didn't mention this before, but you can either hit copy or you can push the enter button to initiate it. And it is now only copied the samples that I've clicked on there for the pattern. So as you can hear, there are none of the drums because I only picked the melodic samples on that particular pattern. Another option that you have in order to create kind of a variation between the different patterns, you can go into pad mute mode, and that allows you to turn off and turn on the pads throughout the entire sequence. In the way that the copy function only copies certain samples, and by copying certain samples, those samples will play throughout the entire however many bars that you have on a particular pattern. The pad mute mode kind of gives you the option to choose at what points during the pattern you want certain pads not to be played, or muting those pads throughout that particular pattern. So for example, we'll play pattern number 5 right here, and by holding the shift reverse, and remain button, you're going to be in pad mute mode. Also, another indicator that you're in pad mute mode, you see that M up there in the top right corner of your screen. That is an indicator that you're in pad mute mode. Another indicator for that also is when you get out of the pattern select, you'll see all of the keys are lit up white. This is one of the, I guess, potential issues with the SP-404 Mark II in pad mute mode. All of the pads are the exact same color, whether they are used particularly in a pattern or if there's no samples in it. So for example, in Bank E, I don't have any samples in here. There are 0 samples in here, but it's the same color as the samples in Bank C, where you see them being lit up because they're being played. So one thing that you should just have an understanding of is you need to have kind of a memory and understanding of where you have samples within the space of your particular banks for your songs. Now, if I go to Bank A, where I typically have my drums, and this is where my drums are located, when you hit that particular pad on there, it's going to mute it. So now my pads are muted, but the moment I touch them again, and you see, of course, they light up red and they're still being hit. These pads are still going. This pattern is still going. It's just that the volume has been completely muted. There's no sound coming through for your song. But the moment I touch these pads again, they come back in. So what you can do is that you can actually record the timing that you have set for when those pads are going to be muted during the course of the pattern. So we'll go back into pattern mode, right? And of course, we're on pattern number 5. That's going to be our pattern right there. If I hit the record button, and just ensure and make sure you're tracking, you have to be in that pad mute mode for this to work. But I'll hit record, and I'm going to select pattern number 5 for us to record. And I'll select it to record. And as you can see right here, once I go into the recording mode, it takes me out of the pad mute mode because the pads are back to their regular orange color. So I have to hit shift, reverse, and remain. And you see pad mute mode and in parentheses record. So right now it's going to record what I put in there. So I could just Now, what I've seen in a lot of cases is that sometimes it'll take an extra sequence for it to come through. But as you can see right here, in this case, once I went through that single cycle and did it, it copies the timing of when those pads were pressed. So in addition to you having all of these different patterns and through the pad mute mode, being able to make variations of those different patterns, or using the copy mode to copy one pattern and place it in a different place by selecting the particular pads. We have a bunch of pads, a bunch of patterns that we want to put together in a sequence. You can automate this. All you have to do is go into pattern mode, in the pattern select mode, right? And you hold down the hold button while you're in pattern mode. Holding that down is going to say, please select 1 through 16. This is going to ask you to put this into a pattern chain. So we're going to hit number 1, and you can see that the pattern chain right now is blank. You can let go of that hold button, and it shows back up all your different patterns that you have right now. Every button that you push from this point on is going to be placed on this particular pattern chain grid. And as you can see right here, similar to how many pads you have on each particular bank, this is going to give you 16 different squares, 16 different patterns that you can put into a single pattern chain. Now, another thing to kind of note, as stated before, to be in pad mute mode, the indicator that M, which was on the top right button, top right of your screen, you can see right here that M is still there at the bottom right of your screen. So if I hit Shift, Reverse, and Remain again, you see that M disappears. I'm no longer in pad mute mode. If you did create and automate some of those pad mute options, you want to make sure that that M is there and you are in pad mute mode. So as I'm pushing each particular pad, it's going to take up the very next space in this sequence of the 16 different patterns that we have available. Now, if you make a mistake, and let's say that you put a pattern in a particular space that you don't want it, you can do a couple of things to kind of alleviate that. Number one is if you see right here by using the inner wheel right here, you'll see this little space, this little underline that goes underneath each of these little patterns right here. This is going to indicate which pattern that you're focusing on in this pattern chain. If I go under C7 right here and I hit the delete button, it's going to delete the C7 pattern. So it will delete that pattern that it is currently under. Now likewise, if I delete that and I want to put in pattern 3, and this is the interesting part on it, I hit pattern 3 and you see where C8 was located right here. It went to the very next space to the right of it and it pushed all the other patterns to the end to fill up the sequence. So now that you have your pattern chain, the only thing that you need to do in order to start your pattern chain is to hit the subpad button. That will initiate and start your pattern chain. So if I hit subpad, it's going to start, and it starts with that first pattern that you have up here, the C1 pattern. Now, remember this little cursor that you have. If you have that cursor on a pad that you want to play and you push the enter button, you see how that little arrow showed up? And now it went from C1 to C8. So if in the middle of these patterns playing, you want to go to another pattern that is on this grid, you push that enter button and it will go to that pattern. Now let's say that you want to go from this particular pattern chain and you have other patterns on another pattern chain. If I push the hold button and I push the number of a different pattern chain, once I go to that next pattern chain, that's going to be the next pattern that's going to play the beginning of that pattern chain. As you can see right here. Now let's take it a little bit further. If I want to go to a different pattern chain, push the hold button, go to pattern chain 1, and right now it's about to hit that first one in the corner, but no, I want to go to this one. If I push that button, that becomes the first pattern that it plays, following going from one pattern chain to another. So now that I have my patterns done and I have a pattern chain created, I have a few options in order to record all of those different patterns and make them into a chain or into a song. Number one, I'm going to do is going to resample, which means I'm going to record internally all the things that I'm doing on my SP-404 Mark II. So I'll hit the resample button. Right now, it is asking me where it wants me to put this sequence of patterns that I'm about to record into a singular audio file. So I'm going to hit bank F. I'm going to go into bank F and I'll pick pad 16 for that. And you see right here, it's saying wait. It wants me to select a pattern, and once I select it, it's going to start recording. Now, you have two options as we talked about before. Option number one being you can hit whatever pad you want to start off with and just hit the subsequent pad after that once each sequence is over, and put those all together to create what you want for your entire song. If you've already created the pattern chain, as we talked about before as well, what you can do the exact same thing that we did to get into the pattern chain mode. Hold down that hold button. Please select the chain. Let's go into chain one, and we're right there into chain one. Once you're in your pattern chain, you have a few options here. Number one, if you go to and hit this button, this is going to start your pattern sequence, and it'll be the same as you hitting one of the patterns. As a matter of fact, if you look at this pattern chain and you look at your pads right here, you'll see one of the pads is lit up right here, pad 1, that corresponds with the pad that is current. This is the pad that is about to play first. You see this pad here blinking, similar to when you hit the next pattern while one pattern was playing. That is going to be the next pad that is going to be played, which you can see right here under sequence 2. If I use my little indicator right here and I spin it, and let's say I go to where 6 is and I push enter, you see things change now. Right now, number 6 is going to be played first when I hit that sub pad button, and then pattern number 8 is going to be played after it. There's also another button blinking, and that is the remain button. So what the remain button is going to do is going to give you 3 different options for how those patterns are going to be played. Repeat all right here is going to repeat the entire pattern chain. So once it gets to that last pattern, pattern C9, when that pattern finishes playing, it will go back and start over and go back to pattern C1. If I hit the remain button, repeat current, whatever pad is currently playing, it will repeat that pad. The only exception to that is, and we'll start playing the pad right now, the only exception to that is this little cursor key. So no matter if it says repeat current, if I use this little cursor key and let's say I hit enter on C4, it is going to go to C4 even though it says repeat current. Another option that you do have when you hit remain a second time is repeat off. Essentially what that's going to do is once you get to this last pattern here in this pattern chain, it's going to stop, and there will be it will not repeat. It will simply stop at this particular pattern. Now also what needs to be mentioned is that right now we are recording our pattern, and when you have this repeat off here, when it stops automatically, it also will automatically stop your recording, and your recording will be complete. Again, if you're recording those sequences of patterns, or if you're recording something in that pattern chain, just ensure you have that little M in there once you go into pad mute mode, so that when you are there into the patterns, that it has that M located up there for the patterns or down there, to know that those little nuance changes that you have between those patterns, those are captured as you're recording. Now another option that you have when you're in pattern mode and you want to transfer it from a pattern to a singular audio file, what you could do, similar to what you've been doing when you've copied one pattern from one place to another, if I hit the copy button and I choose which pattern that I want to copy, when I hit the pattern select button, it's going to take me out of the pattern mode, the pattern realm, and now I'm back into the sample realm. I'm back into the singular pad realm. This is bank C, and you can see this is solid. Even though the colors change, it's solid. That indicates that these are pads that have samples in them. If I go to bank E, for example, you can see right now all of those pads are blinking, which indicates that these are empty pads. So all I have to do is select which pad I want it to go into, and this is going to be the pad that it will export it offline, so you won't hear the actual pattern playing. It will simply export it offline and copy it into that particular pad. Now, similar when you're copying from one pattern to another, if I hit that remain button, it will give me the option to pick which particular samples I want to export from that particular pattern, which means if I only hit these samples right here, and thus those are the only samples that are going to be exported over as an actual audio file. If I press down the hold button into this pattern mode, what comes up is my chain selection a second time. So if I hit 1, now I am copying the entire chain that we created earlier into a sample. And just as the same indicators were before, I can choose one of the blinking banks, and I'll choose that particular bank. And once I hit copy or the enter button the second time, it will export the entire pattern chain. So all of the patterns that you have in that particular chain. The only limitation to this, of course, if you have a song that is more than one pattern chain, that is multiple pattern chains, right now there's not a way to link those pattern chains that you can export into audio files, but you can do multiple audio chains. One more thing to kind of note about exporting from the pattern chains, and then also even exporting just from the patterns themselves. You have to make sure that you are in pad mute mode. So if you are in pad mute mode, when you copy a pattern or copy a pattern chain and export it into an audio file, it will capture those pad mute things that you manipulated on those patterns, and it will have that nuance, those little changes that you made on it. I'll probably just speed this up, but the time that it takes versus a singular pattern compared to the entire pattern chain is, I would say, astronomical. So right now I have it, this is pad chain 1, this is pattern chain 1 going to pad echo 4. If I hit copy, it takes it a while to do this. So from my understanding and everything that I've seen, it's taken anywhere from 10 minutes being the most, just depending on the size of the length of the patterns that you have and how many of those pads that you're using on that pattern chain. You're going to want to transfer them from the SP-404 Mark II in order to get them to another device, i.e. your computer. What you want to do, you want to hold that shift button down and pad 14, your import export. You want to go down to export to SD card. When you hit that, you can do a sample, you can do project, or a multi-pad. Now, these are going to be the interesting options that you can do. If you go to project, essentially all you're going to be doing is exporting all of the different files for your project. This is not going to give you like that singular file that you want to play with as far as your SP-404 Mark II beat is concerned to manipulate on your computer. Now, if you go to sample, that sample that you previously exported to a single entity, you just hit that and it wants you to select the sample. Now, as you can see right here, these are a solid color. This one is blinking. The ones that blink are the ones that have samples on there that are pads. These are your options for exporting. So you hit that pad that you want to export, you hit enter, and of course it's going to be exporting. So the great thing about this, about the SP-404 Mark II, since the 4.0 update, is as the files are being exported or imported, you have the ability to play around with the other different pads until the operation is complete. As of note, the only thing that you can't do, you can't go into pattern mode and you won't be able to play patterns while a file is being exported. So now that you've exported your singular file, we can go into the file just kind of so you can have an understanding of what that particular file looks like. Holding that shift and that import export pad, and let's go to import so we can access that particular folder. And you'll hit sample. Now, just as note, in most of your SP-404 Mark IIs, This folder that just has the little arrow going up, that's going to be your folder that will take you up to a single step above the import folder into the larger hierarchy of the folders. I have this particular folder on top of it, and typically it would be on top only because this particular file name has a space in front of it. So that naming convention means a lot, because in all other instances, this would be the first folder, and that would mean that you're going up towards the higher hierarchy of folders. So I'll hit that, and now I have my import, export, and backup. I'm going to go to my export folder, and it'll have project or sample. Going to sample, you'll see that it is named 5-04 new sample. So this is project 5, and it is pad 04, and that is the particular sample that we have sitting here, just to confirm. And that is the naming convention for it. It's going to be the project name, and it's going to be the particular pad that's associated with it. We've gone over how to internally export those patterns, those sequences into a singular file on your SP-404 Mark II. Right now, we're going to go into that next step, or that next part of it, and talk about that interaction of your SP-404 Mark II to your computer by means of the SP-404 Mark II application. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it right here. And one thing to note here, on previous versions of this particular app, I know that when you would open up the app, it would not connect to your SP-404 Mark II until you hit that connect button, which is located down here. But right now, in this case, but I've seen it even with this new version in some cases, it will still ask you, but in this case, it automatically connected to my SP-404 Mark II. So if you've already exported a particular song, a singular file song on your SP-404 Mark II, more than likely it'll be somewhere on here. And as you can see, this is a visual representation on the application of all of your pads, all of your banks in space and time. The white squares represent the actual pads that have samples located on them, and then the black spaces, the black squares, represent empty spaces. So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to come up here to this top right corner on the application. Just click that Files tab right here, and then this is going to show up. It's going to be kind of a blank area right here. And just to export it is very simple. Find that sample that you want to export. You're going to grab it with your mouse, and then you're going to just drag it over here into this area. One thing that is of note, once you grab any sort of sample on here, you'll see that this little trash can shows up, this little trash can icon. All you need to do, if you want to hover it, if you hover it over this trash can icon, what's going to end up happening is once you let go of it, it's going to delete that file off of your SP-404 Mark II. So if you don't want to delete it and you want to export it, you're going to go into this window right here, you're going to see it light up, and then you're going to release your mouse. Of course, you're going to get this confirmation that this is the operation that you want to conduct. We're going to go to pad 8, just hit OK, and then it will start exporting. Additionally to note, you'll see right here on your Mark II, the little icon that import export is going on. This is a part of that new update where it allows you the opportunity to still play around with your SP-404 Mark II, even when something is being imported and exported on it. Once the file has finished exporting, you'll see right up here, it'll have the name of the file. And if you look at the name right here, it's going to be the name of the project, the number of the project that it's in. This is the bank that it's in, so it's in bank 5 or bank E, and this is the pad number that you exported. So project, bank, pad number. And if you don't know exactly where to find the file after it has been exported, you don't have to look for it. You can really just go down here to this open folder button, click on that, and it will send you directly to the export sample folder. Now, before we go on, let's just kind of go over by default what happens when you are on your SP-404 Mark II and you have it connected to your computer. This is specifically for the Mac. So if you go to your home folder for your user, go to SP-404 user. It should show up right there by default. You click on that and then you have the different folders right here. This is where your patterns are going to be exported, and we'll go into that a little bit later. This is where all the samples are going to be exported under export sample, and then this rolling folder. This particular folder is by default where all of your projects are going to be exported when you export them off your SP-404 Mark II. In addition to you being able to export those single files or those single pads, you can also do the same thing with your patterns. So if you go down to the bottom left corner of the application, you see where it says patterns. You click on that, and there are your patterns on your SP-404 Mark II. If I went to pattern mode here on the actual device, you'll see it mirrors the exact same place that we have patterns located as it does here on the screen. And in order to export the pattern, you'll just do the exact same thing that you would do with the individual pads. You just click and grab it, and then you'll just drag it over to this portion right here in the top right part of the application. And just like with the pads, you'll see right there that has that trash can. Just like we said before, if you hover it over that trash can and release, that will delete the particular pattern. Otherwise, you just go into this square, let go, and it's going to ask you for 3 different options when you actually export it. So the first way to export it, this is going to be the multi-pad mode. And essentially what multi-pad mode does is that it separates each individual pad in space and time, and it layers it and gives it its own separate audio file. This is going to be good for people who want to place their audio file into a DAW and then just kind of do all of the mixing, all of the mastering on those separate files. The only problem that I could see with this going forward is for someone like me, I use an entire bank or an entire mute group as my singular instrument, and it treats every single pad as an instrument. So if I hit a pad one time in an 8-bar sequence, that one time I hit that pad on that 8-bar sequence is going to have its own individual track. So I'm going to click here on multi-pad mode, and just with an understanding that the more pads that you use, the longer it's going to take for it to export the entire file in multi-pad mode. Also, if the bars are longer, if it's a longer pattern, that's also going to put into account how long it takes for the SP-404 Mark II app to export that in multi-pad mode. What is also of note is that as you're doing this with your patterns, exporting the patterns is different than exporting the singular pad or singular sample, in that you see right here now it says app processing, which means unlike when you're exporting a singular file, you have the ability to still do things on your SP-404 Mark II. This pretty much locks the device while it's exporting the multi-pad mode when it's doing it from the pattern. So once you've completed exporting it, you'll see right here, it'll show that list, that name list of all of the different pads that you've exported into that multi-mode function. And then if we go to the open folder, hit that open folder button, where it says export sample, you'll see now there is a multi-pad folder that is located here. You click that, it's going to have the project number on here, and then click that. This is going to be from the singular pattern C1. So pattern C1 here on the pad, this particular pattern is the pattern that was broken up. The next option you have when you're exporting a pattern, if I go and export it here, instead of multi-pad mode, we're going to bounce mode. And essentially what bounce mode does is that it bounces or it exports it similar to how you would do it on the SP-404 Mark II. It'll take that file, that pattern, and turn it into a singular wave file. So if I hit OK, And obviously, since it is a singular file instead of multi-files being made, this is going to take a lot shorter. As always, it'll show the name of the file right here, have the project name, and then the name of the pattern, C1, and label it bounce. Of course, you just open folder, and in that export sample folder, here is the actual file right here. The last option that you have when you are exporting patterns is going to be the SMF mode. This is essentially going to be a MIDI file that you are exporting. So what you're doing is you're taking that pattern, you're taking those pad triggers that create the singular pattern, and you're turning that into a MIDI file for you to export. So if I hit OK, and of course it's only a few kilobytes big, so it's automatically there. Click that open folder button, and of course you see export pattern folder instead of the export sample folder. This is something that you can install and operate directly on your DAW. So if I double click it right here, it's going to open up my DAW, which is Logic Pro. And then you can see right here, it has turned it into the patterns that you would normally see within your DAW. So that's going to do it for this video. I think when it comes to using the SP-404 Mark II and then the bounce feature, the only problems that I have, or the only improvements I would say that Roland should make on this. Number one, I think that when you're exporting the patterns and you're able to render those into either multi-pad mode or into a singular file, I would like to also have the option to do pattern change and to export those directly onto your computer. I think another thing that I would like to see in the way that when you do an export in multi-pad mode and it treats each individual pad as an instrument, just to have the ability to kind of link, merge certain pads onto a singular file. So to say if you want to merge a single bank as one of the multi-pad files that is exported, or even a single mute group, to do it that way, I think that will be very helpful and keep away from a lot of the clutter of all the files being created from that multi-pad mode. I guess I'd be curious to know from your perspective, how do you guys transfer your songs from your SP-404 Mark II onto your computer or onto your studio, your mix device, or whatever that you're using? Are you using it the old-fashioned way where you just take out the SD card and plug it into your computer or whatever? Or do you use any of these different techniques? Is there anything on this video that you've seen that I haven't covered that you do something a little bit different than the way that I described it here? Let me know in the comments. And as always, I thank you for the view. I thank you for the listen. And until next time, peace.